Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this first meeting of the municipal year of the Community and Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to first take nominations for chair for the 23-24 municipal year. Are there any nominations for chair? Pete nominated Chris Johnson. Is there a seconder? David Cornish. Any other nominations? No. So can I just take a quick show of hands on that? 2, 3, 4. Any against? Abstentions? Okay, that's carried. In the absence of the chair, I now need to do appointment of vice chair. So are there any nominations for vice chair? David? Pete Dennis. Is there a seconder? Al? Any other nominations? And again, just a quick show of hands in favour of Pete for vice chair. That's carried. Thank you very much. So Pete, if you could take us through the agenda until the chair gets here.
Okay, evening everybody. Do I have to go through the preamble about this is being recorded, etc.? I don't have the words with me, but I'll just make them up. This is being recorded, so whenever anybody speaks, could they please use the microphone? Thank you. Moving on, apologies.
Thank you. We've had apologies received from Councillor Laura Blumenthal.
Thank you. And just for information, Chris is supposed to be here. I don't know whether he's got caught in traffic or whatever. So we'll continue with this. Do we have any, the minutes of the previous meeting to which I didn't attend? So do we have any comments on that previous meeting? Okay. Do we have a seconder? Okay, so take a vote. Minutes. Giles, do you have a question?
Oh, no. I wasn't here.
Okay.
Other people are happy to work.
Yeah. I was going to abstain because I wasn't there. So, oh, that might be Chris coming. Moving on, do we have any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest. Public questions. Do you have any public questions?
No public or member questions, Pete.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the item, number 8, annual flood risk management update. So I think, oh, sorry, Callum.
Just before we go over to Bonnie, can I just introduce Fiala? Fiala's a trustee of the local flood forum, and she's been invited to the committee to perhaps sort of give some additional information once officers have spoken, if that's okay with you, Pete.
Perfectly fine. Good evening. Thank you. Welcome for coming along.
I'm the community representative on the Thames Regional Flood and Coast Committee as well, so I have a dual role.
Okay, thank you. I guess procedure now is as the chair has arrived here. Are you okay to chair?
Get them.
Yeah, so.
Boniface, do you want to carry on with your presentation? Can you hear me? You're on mute.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the opportunity. My name is Boniface Ngu, and I am the Flood Risk and Drainage Manager for Wokingham Borough Council. And joining me on this call is my manager, Andy Glencross. But I will be doing the presentation for this evening. So I am going to be presenting the flood risk and drainage report for 2022-23. And the report was circulated a few weeks back, and I'm hoping that everybody has had a chance to have a look at the report. Generally, we had a very brilliant summer last year, and we also had a relatively dry summer. We also had a January that was very frosty. Also, we had a lot of progress that was made on the aspects of the lead local flood authority responsibility, which entailed looking at flood risk management for the borough, also looking at surface water management issues and groundwater management issues. In our responsibility as lead local flood authority, we carried out CCTV surveys and repair of the drainage network within the borough, because that is part of our responsibility as a highway authority. We also carried out some flood risk and drainage management schemes, and specifically we carried out the Barkham Ride project, which had to do with flooding on the Barkham Ride near the number 65, which flooded regularly. But with the new scheme in, we are hopeful that the flooding problems in that area has been resolved, or at least reduced. Also, we have routine revenue drainage maintenance that we carry out, which entails clearing out of gullies and pipes that have been blocked to reduce drainage within flood risk within the borough. We also comment on planning applications, and last year by last year I mean 2022-23, we commented on over 700 applications compared to 2021-22, where we commented on about 670 applications. And despite the fact that we were one man short, and we are still one man short in the team, we managed to get over 500 of those applications within the statutory response time. We also carried out CCTV surveys on Barkham Ride, Shingfield Road, and Headley Road East, and all these CCTV works then led to further repairs to be done on the network, which has improved on the drainage situation and the flood risk situation. In terms of the capital drainage schemes, we also have been working on a flood alleviation scheme for Church Lane, and we have successfully just completed the detailed design, and we are looking at going out to tender for the construction of this scheme, which is going to entail the construction of an attenuation basin, which will hopefully reduce the flooding on Church Lane, which is coming as a result of overland flows from the Shingfield West side of Church Lane. Hopefully the attenuation basin is going to be able to hold back flood waters that runs off the surface and release it gradually back into the network, hopefully after the rain has stopped, and this will improve on the flood situation on Church Lane. But we are still about to go out to tender for the construction of this project. On top of that, we also have about 40,000 gullies in the borough that we maintain on an annual basis on a cyclical gully maintenance program. That on its own helps to unblock any blockages within the network and improve on the flood risk situation in the borough as a whole. Talking about gully maintenance, the cyclical maintenance program is a reactive program that we are following at the moment. But at the back of that, we are looking at doing things proactively, and we had smart drainage sensors that were on trial within the borough. Unfortunately, the trial didn't run as smoothly as we would have expected. And we are at the moment looking at collaborating with other neighboring lead local flood authorities that have trialed this smart drainage program to find out what system they implemented, because the system we implemented was the MAP 16 system, which didn't quite provide the data that we were anticipating to inform decision making on whether to go ahead with the smart drainage expanded to a wider network within the borough. So we are still at the stage of getting in touch with other lead local authorities that have trialed different smart drainage sensors rather than the MAP 16 smart drainage sensor that we trialed. So once we are able to get this information from the other local authorities, we would be able to inform ourselves on whether the system is actually beneficial financially or not, because we don't want to invest in something that is not going to be financially beneficial for the council. On top of that, we also have a network of manholes that we need to maintain on a 5-yearly basis. And what we do, because in the borough we have about 5,000 gullies, we are 5,000 manholes rather. We spread it out such that we do a certain percentage every year, and so that within the 5 years we would have covered our statutory responsibility under the Highway Maintenance and Management Program. That at the moment is on track, and this last year we managed to do 1,250 gullies to round up the 5 years preceding. And then we are getting into year 1 of the next 5 years this year. And we are going to be doing 20% each year to cover the entire manhole network within the borough. We also, because of the limited resources that we have in flood risk and drainage in the borough, we time and again look out for funding opportunities. And this year we were lucky enough to see and apply for funding for a natural flood management scheme. And we were successful, and we are hoping to get about £47,000 from the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee to carry out a natural flood management project in the Swallowfield and Risley area of Wokingham Borough Council. We also look at flood defense structures within the borough. Any new structures that are constructed within the borough, we'll be looking at designating those structures so that they are not tampered with, and as such they can perform their flood reduction role. And also we maintain a register of all our assets, and talking about manholes, gullies, pipes in the borough, such that if any requests should come, or if there should be complaints about particular areas, we would know exactly how to respond. So generally, that is an overview of what the flood risk and drainage team has been doing during the past financial year, 2022-23. That is a quick summary of what happened during the 2022-23 financial year, and I'm happy to take questions.
Is there anyone on the floor who has a question? Please, David.
Thank you, David. Thank you for that. I noted your comments about the scheme at Barkham Ride in Finchampstead, Barkham Road 65, which is actually in my ward. Now, I'm familiar with the issues on that site, having had contact with some of the residents over the years. I wasn't aware that work had actually been carried out. And basically, I knew it was expected, but I think the request was, would it be possible going forwards to have the members actually informed in each ward if major drainage work has been carried out and that's been successful? The second question related to that was you mentioned CCTV surveys of the same road, and was that related to the same scheme? Was it before or after? And the third one was, I had an experience recently when talking to the Rights of Way team, completely unrelated to this, where they sat in front of me and went through a program of work they had going about 3-4 years of what they wanted to do, and then asking them about it in more detail. They only actually had funding for 1 year of that, which means it's all pie in the sky, to be frank. So the question was, the work you've just outlined going forward, have you got the budget for it in place now?
Thank you very much, Charles. Your first one was informing members about schemes that are going on. Before the scheme actually started, members were notified that the scheme was about to start. It started in August last year, and I believe that I sent emails out to the members informing them that the scheme was about to start. I didn't send a follow-up email to say that the scheme had been completed, which is what I should have done, to say, yes, the scheme that started in September has been completed, or the scheme that started in August has been completed, just to inform members. I'll bear that in mind for next time. On your second question about CCTV, the CCTV is on Barkham Road. The capital project scheme was carried out on Barkham Ride, but the CCTV was carried out on Barkham Road, which are two different roads. Maybe that's where there is a bit of confusion, because they are all in Barkham. And then in terms of funding for the project, yes, there is funding for the Church Lane project, and we would also be able to have some funding for another project, which is on Jordan's Lane, that we are looking at for this financial year. So to answer your third question, yes, there is funding allocated for the Church Lane project.
Thank you, Barnabas. David?
Thank you, Chair. One of the questions I have is about risk assessment or risk valuation. I can think of at least 2 planning applications I've attended in the last 12 months where the flood risk was described as being 1 in 100 or 1 in 100 years. And yet many people involved in those sites could very readily recall serious flooding in each of those locations 2 or 3 times in the previous 10 years. And when I asked the planning officer concerned, the answer was that a flood risk of 1 in 100 years doesn't mean it's likely to flood once every 100 years. It just means that in any given year, the flood risk is 1 in 100. And I understand that these are set models, but given the impact of climate change, of very sudden, very heavy rainfall, are we looking at recalibrating how we measure those flood risks, particularly on some of the tributary rivers like the Embrook or Barkham Brook?
Thank you, David. When it comes to flood risk, it is a probability, and yes, the 1 in 100 doesn't mean that it will only flood once every 100 years. It means there is a 1% chance that it could flood any year. In terms of climate change, when we assess flood risk documents, we take climate change into consideration, and we insist that developers take a 40% accommodation for climate change. So if they are designing an attenuation basin for a particular development, if it's a 10 cubic meter attenuation basin, we would request for a further 40% on top of any attenuation that is provided for that development based on any impermeable areas that are created. So yes, climate change is being taken into consideration, and we are very rigorous when it comes to that, when we are assessing planning applications.
Bonnie?
Hi, Bonnie. Thank you for that. It's very interesting. Couple of questions on ArcGIS. I wondered what manholes and covers are actually on the map, because I had one today where a resident tried to report an issue with a broken one and it wasn't there, but I don't think it was one of yours. It was actually Thames Water. I'm just wondering what we should expect to be on ArcGIS for people to report and what isn't on there. Or maybe Andy can answer that if it's wider than just flooding.
No, yes, it can be a bit confusing, because when residents see a manhole, all they think about is it's drainage, it's Wokingham Borough Council. But there are surface water drainage sewers that are managed by Thames Water, and there are surface water sewers that are managed by Wokingham Borough Council. If a resident should report a manhole issue, we would check our maps, because our maps have the sewers that are Wokingham Borough owned and sewers that are Thames Water owned. And if it's a Thames Water sewer, we would refer them, we would let them know that it is a Thames Water sewer, but we would also follow that up by informing Thames Water that an issue has been reported on their network, and we have pointed the reporter in their direction so they can take action.
Thanks, Bonnie. Is the objective then to have all of the manhole covers in the borough on ArcGIS, because they're not at the moment? And I mean, there's a wide variety of all sorts of stuff on the manhole covers, from drainage to telecoms to all sorts of things. What's the objective here?
I'm not sure I quite understood the question.
I think Pauline, we maintain an ArcGIS layer of our assets, and the difficulty with trying to maintain a layer of other people's assets is, where does the information come from and how does it get updated? So at the moment we don't include other people's assets on our ArcGIS layers. I think that what Bonnie's saying is where someone actually, you know, we can't do an automatic report it because, you know, Vulcan Highways cannot fix it. It has to go to Thames Water. So I think that what Bonnie's saying is when we do get those reports where they cannot be done on the automated system, then we check who owns the manhole cover and then point the customer in the right direction.
Gotcha. Thank you. So how many reports a year do you get?
Reports on
the HIM system.
On ArcGIS.
But sorry, Polly, just to be clarified, ArcGIS is the basis for the HIM system. So
how many?
Are you asking how many drainage issues do we get reported on the HIM system?
Yeah.
If Bonnie knows,
about,
I'd be very pleased. But if he doesn't, we'll find out and get back to you.
Okay, thanks. Do you know?
That is one that would have to find out and get back to Pauline.
Okay, thanks, Bonnie. And then final couple of questions. There's a long-standing problem with water flowing out of a drain on the Lower Early Peripheral Road going up towards the Black Boy roundabout on the right-hand side. It's been like that for about 5 years, or maybe longer, maybe 10. I've reported it several times. Is that a spring or is it actually a problem? The water actually flows out of one drain, goes down the road, and then goes down the next one. Do you know about that?
I am not aware of that, but it is certainly something that I would have to have a look at. If it's coming from one gully to another, is it something that happens all the time, even in the dry periods?
I don't think so. I think it's only in the wet, but it happens quite a lot. It's not. It doesn't only happen when it's raining, but it isn't there absolutely all the time.
If I could just interrupt, can we take specific elements, specific items like this to another level? So put an email in for those ones, and then we just...
No, I've asked about this 3 or 4 times already, but I'm just interested. I'll send you a separate email, Bonnie, and then maybe we can get to the bottom of it.
Please do, Pauline. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Bonnie. I've got a bunch of questions, so bear with me. My first one is, what's the relationship with Thames Water? So, for example, trying to get Thames Water to come out and do something can be somewhat difficult. So, for example, looking down, shoving a CCTV camera down a drain, whereas we, as a WBC, have the capability to do so. Is there some way that we can do CCTV and then say to Thames Water, get on with it, lads? Or what happens? What pressure can you bring to get Thames Water to actually do something? That's my one question. So I've got a bunch of more, but I'll let you get on with that one.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. The relationship we have with Thames Water is supposed to be a cordial relationship, but to be nice, I don't think we can put them as much pressure as we would like to. We can point out an issue that we have noticed with their network and encourage them to do something about it, because there are many situations where our gullies connect into the Thames Water network, and if their network is faulty, that leads to problems on our network. So we encourage them as much as we can to try and do something, but a lot of the times we don't get them to act as quickly as we would do. But we cannot go and do their work for them.
Okay. Just to follow on for that one, is there any legal framework that WBC can bring to Thames Water to actually repair any damage due to their negligence?
None that I can think of, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
If we had that powers, we would be using it.
Okay, thank you.
But unfortunately not.
Okay, moving on. Touching a subject that David mentioned with regard to climate change, one of the things I've noticed is that rather than having low-level rain, we get heavy bursts of rain. I think that's been demonstrated through the last year or so. And during those heavy bursts, we have very localised flooding in the borough. And I'm wondering, is that on the plan to deal with? If not, why not? And do you measure it?
Flash flooding is something that comes when we least expect. But when we have impending weather forecast, we do some proactive work. Some hotspot areas within the borough, we will make sure that the grills are cleared and the gullies are cleared to make sure that the system has capacity to take as much flow that runs off the land as possible. But other than that, if it comes quickly with little or no warning and not captured by the Met office, it is very difficult for us to react to. But generally, what we do is we try to maintain the gullies and clean the pipes as much as we can with the available budget that we have to make sure that the system has capacity to cater for any runoff that comes through.
Okay, I think you've touched on the deal with the immediate issue if there's a forecast coming. What I'm looking for is, we know there are hotspots within the borough of they're liable to flood when there is a flash flood that you may not know about. Do we actually track those, and do we have a plan to deal with them? So I can name several off the top of my head. I just wondered if you guys track them and think, actually, we know that's going to flood if there's going to be a flash flood. So let's do something about that proactively before the weather forecast comes in.
The proactive work we do is making sure that, like, we have for the gully maintenance program, some gullies are maintained once every year and some were being maintained twice every year. Those are for the areas that we are aware that flood more frequently. And we did 2 times cleaning every year. That would generally reduce on flood risk from flash flooding. But with budget limitations, we are looking at a one-time gully once every year for every gully maintenance, as well as ad hoc maintenance as and when reported by residents, to ensure that the system is clear and ready for the next rainfall.
Sorry to come in on that as well, Bonnie. I think David as well. You know, some of the flooding that you're talking about, surface water flooding, if you're talking about an engineering solution to changing the capacity of the network, a lot of those instances are not straightforward and also involve Thames Water assets. One of the most interesting, I always thought, is Sewell Avenue in Wokingham, where we've had a bit of surface water flooding of late. One of the things that came out of the investigations we did was that if the Embrook is in flood, the pipe that comes, the surface water sewer that Thames Water own, is below the floodwater level, and that in itself causes the pipe to back up a little bit when the river's in flood. And there isn't a straightforward way of fixing that, because it's literally about gravity then. So we do where we can, and where there is an obvious solution, we will look to include, you know, introduce additional gullies, which we've done on an ad hoc basis where we get the reports. But, you know, if it's a much larger issue where we're talking about, you know, additional piped infrastructure, it can be very, very expensive to sort out and not straightforward either.
Okay, thank you. One more question for you, even though I've got a load more, but just give other people a chance to speak. You mentioned gullies. I happen to know there are issues where we have a gullies that may or may not be owned by WBC, may be owned by somebody else. Is there any work done by WBC to ensure that other owners of gullies keep them cleared? Or is there some mechanism for WBC to do the work to clear the gully and then charge the landowner for it?
With drainage infrastructure that is not WBC owned, if there are issues, what we'll do is we'll identify the owner in the first place and notify them of the issue, and ask them to let us know when they'll clean it. And if they don't clean it by then, we would let them know that we'll do the work and claim cost of the work done on them.
Great, that's a perfect answer. Thank you. Anybody else got any questions? Sorry, because I've got loads of questions, but pass it on to anybody else.
Norman's got some questions. Do you want
Thank you. Hi. My question really is around drainage on new property development sites. I mean, by the very nature, the drains tend to be put in quite early below the road surfaces, which are usually put in right at the start of a development. And then all the building work occurs and the drains get filled up. I mean, we were out and about today in Shinfield and can see drains there on a building site that are all blocked up. I just wonder if there's any, I mean, clearly they'll get cleared again at the end, but goodness knows what's gone down the drains in the meantime. I just wonder if there's more we can do in specifying the protection of drains during construction of these sites so that they are nice and clean and clear when the developers leave. I mean, at the moment, the grids are on, all the muck and everything just sits in the drains. They get completely covered up. It just seems to be a problem that gets built into the developments right from the word go. So I just wonder what your thoughts are on that, how we could improve things there.
With new development, there is adoption that follows the development being completed, and before we adopt any new road network, we would do an inspection to make sure that the network is clean and clear before we take it on, because we know when we take it on, if it's not clear, then we would be carrying out that responsibility of cleaning it. And before we take it on, we would want to be sure that the system is running as it should do, and it is clean. So prior to adoption, that check is done to make sure that we are not taking on anything that is not at full capacity.
Okay, thanks. I mean, yeah, you've got the adoption process, but I do still worry about what's going into the system, that it's not perfect. I think there's more that could be done to protect these drains, I think, during development.
I think, Norman, there is, but you've got to remember that during development, they're not in our control, they're in the control of the developers. And, we can specify more and more stuff, but do I think they'll actually do it until they're at the point of adoption? Probably not, because we're never going to know about it effectively. I think the only weakness in the adoption process is that our only leverage over the developers is to refuse to take the network on until it's a suitable standard, which obviously can be frustrating for residents because it means that the adoption is delayed, and that can cause some issues, as I know you've both experienced it, places like Red Hatch Drive. So it's just, yeah, it's not a perfect system. I'm not convinced that we would be able to get the developers to do it when we're not in control of the network effectively in any way.
Sure, it would be difficult, but maybe it's worth trying a bit more.
We'll have a look into it, but see what we can do.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, go on.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, first of all, just ask about Church Lane in Shinfield then. I mean, the developer, if this was the West Shinfield SDL, I mean, are the developers paying for this?
This is sorry, as I said, this isn't part of the surface water issues. It predates the SDL, doesn't it, Bonnie? This has been a regular problem for a number of years. It's due to the slope of the ridge in Shinfield West that is clay, and when it rains, you get a load of water coming all the way downhill, and it comes through the Pullins Yard onto Church Lane, doesn't it? Pretty much, Bonnie, is that a pretty good description of it? Yeah. It's not a development related scheme. It's actually it's a surface water flooding scheme that's just a function of the geology and topology of the area, and it's been long standing. We've just been trying to put in a mitigation pond, attenuation pond, which has been challenging mainly because of a big SSE main underneath it, isn't it, Bonnie? I think where we chose to put it. So we're trying to store some of that water before it gets onto the road, effectively, and slow its progress into the local network. I don't know if Bonnie wants to add anything to that.
You have absolutely nailed it, Andy.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, okay, a couple more points. Following up from what Pauline was saying about the reporting system, I think the problem is it just says something like report a broken manhole, and so when you go into it, we don't realise, or the resident doesn't realise that just means the only manholes that are on there are WBC surface manholes. We think it's to report, broken cable TV manhole and all sorts of manholes. So I think it's just the labelling, the expectation of the resident when they press that button isn't what they get. Right. Oh yeah. I was just going to ask about household drives. I mean, they're supposed to when people block pave their drives and it runs off onto the road, adding to the surface water. I mean, aren't they supposed to put in some sort of drainage to catch that? And if they don't, is this a planning enforcement thing? Because people could do this without planning permission. So how's that resolved?
In terms of people doing works on their drives, if it's a permeable drive that they are installing, it will still do the job of performing as a grassed area, because when the rain falls, it can seep through. Normally there is a sand base layer which acts as some kind of attenuation. So when it rains, it will go through the pavings and down into the sand layer, which then acts as attenuation. But if they are using impermeable material, that's where it becomes a problem, because everything just runs off into the carriageway drainage system, which then can overwhelm it. If it's something that goes through planning, we can put a condition for it to be permeable. But if it's something that doesn't go through planning, I don't know what planning can do to get that dealt with. But we can only make comments on what comes through the consultation process.
Okay, thanks.
Everybody happy? Ish? Peter.
Sorry, I did say I had some more questions. Yep. One thing we talked about flooding. What I'm thinking about is what about pond protection? So I know we have ponds all over the place. Do you guys look after ponds to make sure they don't dry out or anything?
It depends on how the ponds were designed. If they were designed to be detention basins, that means they will only hold water when it rains, and when the rain stops and the water empties out, it will remain dry. That one, we cannot make it wet because it's a dry basin. If it's a detention basin, then when it's constructed, the wet area of the basin needs to be clay lined. If it's not in a clay subsoil, that would then mean that the permanent water level stays at the level it was designed to stay, and if it loses some of its water, it will be to evaporation or evapotranspiration, and there is very little we can do about that. If we have long dry periods, we unfortunately we can't tanker water in to keep the basins wet.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The thrust of my question was really, is your team looking after ponds? So, for example, if a pond is going to dry out due to whatever weather circumstances and it's got livestock in it, who's responsible to look after that livestock?
By livestock, Peter,
you mean the fish?
So just a quick thing. So I suppose the responsibility is with the landowner, although we do protect our own ponds. And if we have important fisheries, we would, I noticed we had a very dry summer. I don't think it was this year, but a couple of years ago at Dinton, where we have an important fishery with large fish. And the fishery manager brought in aeration machines to keep the water aerated because it was getting very hot. And as water gets hot, oxygen evaporates out of it as well. So that sort of thing we would do. The only challenge I'd put back to you is that, ponds drying up, and I'm an ecologist, is a natural part of the habitat sometimes. And, where you have fish populations established, they are established and thrive at the cost of some other wildlife sometimes. And sometimes it's just a sort of cyclical thing. Every 10 years, your pond dries up, the fish population gets eradicated, and back come the dragonflies and great crested newts. And it just goes in that kind of cycle. So, I think that seeing that a pond drying up as always as a negative, and it is not necessarily the truth. Hope that helps, and I'm happy to chat more about it if you'd like to.
That was actually
an
quite
interesting subject of mine.
That was an interesting comment you made there. One final question for me is, my apologies, is how big is the team? It's actually two questions. How big is the team, and ideally, what resources would you like in order to do the job?
We in the flood risk and drainage team, we have the planning side of flood risk and drainage, which deals with commenting on planning applications and making sure that development, proposed development, takes into consideration climate change and mitigates against any impermeable area that is created by that development coming in. In that team, we are short of one person. And we also have the reactive maintenance side of drainage, which deals with the maintenance of the drainage infrastructure within the borough. And in that team, we have a full house. So we are looking at recruiting a new member of the team, and then we will be at full capacity, and things would run smoothly, hopefully.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Fiona, I do apologise for missing your introduction when you were sitting down earlier on, but please, would you like to address?
No problem. Josh, that's a lot of food for thought. And I think actually I'm going to start on your last point first and add to your list of resources, because I know resources are tight and know that from working with you in the past that limits what you'd like to do. So if you do have a magic wand and the council can provide more money, please can we have someone looking at things at a more strategic level? I don't know when the SFRA is due, but can we look at that in terms of the climate change we're talking about? We're talking a lot about these rainfall bursts. Now, exactly as we've heard, some of those assets cannot manage potentially what is coming our way. If you've got this much water and this much piping, it's just not going to work. So you need to look much more at natural flood management and things like that. And I know I've heard about you've successfully taken a bid to the RFCC for NFM, and I would say do more of that, because we've changed our principles a couple of years ago now. So we do look upon NFM as being something that's very, very important. Which brings me to my next point about resourcing. Again, if you've got your magic wand of funding, wouldn't it be great to have somebody whose role it was to look around the borough and into other boroughs to work out where can water be held back? If the assets can't actually do things because they physically can't without spending vast quantities of very precious money, what else is out there? And also with that person then going out to get the funding, because getting funding is challenging. I know that if you put a bid into the RFCC, you probably need to fill a war and peace document in. We are working on that, by the way. But that's time and resource that the team don't have. So if you've got money, those type of things are important. To pick up some of the things that we've been talking about, Thames Water work differently from the council. I think if you fundamentally think about them as working with customers, then that spins a little bit about how you deal with them. So if you've got complaints coming in from locals about that, I mean, do we say to them, well, this is how you approach Thames Water, this is how you contact them, and actually dissuade them from being the local champion who then emails Thames Water a singular complaint, because that's not how the system works. They work with customers. So the more people that complain about something, the higher it goes up their system. Now, Thames Water will tell you that. So maybe if your people are coming to you with problems with a Thames Water asset, if you can provide them the information so they can easily get them and all their neighbours to talk to the Thames Water, and maybe not on the record, but as much as often, then you're much more likely to get responses. So use your community to help you get these assets corrected, so they don't then undo other things that you're doing. Norman, your question about development here. And it's even more complicated than that, because the drains go in first, and you say then the roads go in, then the houses go in. So all that then gets undone. They'll put the piping in for something else through the drainage. So it's even bigger than that. And I'm always happy to hear when the council actually take on the SUDs because at least that means somebody with a conscience is actually going to look after them. The bigger problem is actually longer term for when you get management companies that take them over, that you now have no idea what they're taking over. You've got no idea how they're going to be maintained or what other problems you're going to encounter. That's a really big problem. Tony and I spent years working with the Hatch Farm development, and we know there are misconnects there. We know those swales. We had students go down and test. We know that they test those misconnects. You're getting sewage going into different places, and I'd love it if WBC could take that one on, but I don't think you're going to. So you've got a much bigger problem there going forward. What have I got as well? Drives, don't get me started, because I mean, even if you put a permeable one in, if they're not treated correctly, they become impermeable very, very quickly. And you can imagine an owner putting in a drive that is permeable, and then the next person coming in afterwards and doing something to it which makes it impermeable. So that is another big issue. But I think I'm going to return just at the end back to my kind of initial point about things like the SFRA. I don't know when that's going to be reviewed again, or if it's going, and when it is reviewed, is it going to be reviewed through the lens that we are going to get more of these heavy rain bursts and therefore what can we do to hold the flow back? What areas, can we work with other authorities to work out other places where we can hold the flow? New developments are a really good way, in theory, if we had our way, of actually holding the water back as well. So those types of things also spring to mind. So I think I'm going to end up by just kind of saying, you kind of need more money, folks, to do everything if we're going to protect ourselves.
Yes, please.
Thanks. I wonder if you'd say a bit more about natural flood management and also your views on dredging rivers.
Just because you end up creating a rod for your own back. And I've been on a journey. When I first set up the flood group, I lived by the Lond at that point, and anybody who knew me then will know I was going dredge the rivers, dredge the rivers. Don't, because you just create a whole load of problems. Think of those problems we've got. Was it up north where the dam from the river broke? A lot of that is because when you dredge, put the spoils on the side, and you end up with perched rivers, which then when they break, you can see how bad that is. But also it's just a constant cycle. Once you start dredging, you have to re-dredge and re-dredge. And I've not even touched on then all the other impacts. But again, if you think about these big rain events we're now getting, it's the same problem. You'd have to dredge, hugely down and wide to actually hold all that water. So that's where natural flood management comes in. We try and revert back to where we were almost pre-war, because I mean it's the war, and actually I could go on to this hours EU policy, which has actually ended up with the rain to river times being sped up with the way we farm, the way we manage land, and undoing all of those so we can slow the flow back and give a chance for rivers and all our assets to actually manage what which comes along after it rains. I mean, NFN is still in its early days at the moment. And again, this might be, that was the other point I'd forgotten, is if you look to what's going on in London, they have a lot of concrete and they're now having to work very hard on how do you manage flash flooding. So they've got a lot of projects out there where they're greening the street, putting rain gardens into streets. Any bit that's a bit green or anywhere that's not green, they're trying to put a green patch in so that you at least got some permeability. So it might be worth talking to colleagues in London about their greening the street initiatives. There's quite a lot going on. And of course, they end up making the areas look really lovely.
Thank you very much. Do you anything else you'd like to comment on?
Oh, God,
no. Right.
Honestly,
I don't want. But no, thank you very much for the presentation.
I'll disappear off.
Okay, that's it for the committee. Then thank you, gentlemen, for presenting, and get out there and put the kettle on.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Hi, Narinda.
Good evening.
So if you'd like to present your Combating Drugs Partnership presentation, please do.
Kick off, no problem. So committee members would have been reminded that this report came to committee in January earlier this year. It's in respect of the Combating Drugs Partnership arrangements that are currently in place in the west of Berkshire footprint. So we're in a Combating Drugs Partnership arrangement together with West Berkshire, Reading and Wokingham. And the report that's been circulated in the papers outlines the sort of strategic approach to that Combating Drugs Partnerships priorities in respect of delivering the Harm to Hope strategy, which is the government's response to tackling substance misuse, drugs, including drugs and alcohol, amongst different areas of the country, and making arrangements and providing a statutory framework within which local partners are to work together to combat substance misuse and the issues of alcohol and drugs. So that report came to committee in January as was requested. Sadly, I wasn't able to attend that meeting due to being unwell. And there were a number of questions raised as part of the report. So we brought this report, refreshed it, the information within it, and answered the questions that were raised by committee at that time, which are included in Appendix 1 of the report. So there were a number of different questions that were posed at the time. They were how widespread was or is the drugs problem within Wokingham Borough area? What actions are being considered to break the cycle of demand? Could we further comment be provided with regards to relatively high levels of drug driving offences? And then what was being done to combat the use of nitrous oxide, especially amongst school children? So Appendix 1, if I draw your attention to Appendix 1, we've outlined some information within that appendix to provide information to the committee with respect to those questions. So we could see in the graph that's in the papers, the first graph there, the total number of offences broken down by month for the period of January 22 through to April 23, which is the latest data that we had available to us. And the graph outlines what sort of the peak times of the months look like in terms of that information. There's also information contained in the second graph with regards to drug offences by neighbourhood. And I'll draw your attention to what looks like the alarmingly high figure of 139 offences in what is referred to by police neighbourhood wards as the Early Fields location. But what I would state is within that ward, we have Loddon Valley Police Station, which is where quite large number of drugs are actually found when people are arrested, sadly at custody, when possessions are recovered or drugs are on the person when they're arrested. They do go as a location indicator into that ward because they are found at the police station at point of custody. Also within the paper, I just highlight that the sort of category in terms of adults in treatment, the two sort of main lines in terms of...
Sorry, can I just interrupt? I think there's a pertinent question for a topic you've just covered. If David, do you want to quickly...
There is sorry, just as a point of information, on the data you've got here for drug offences, is this convictions or arrests, or what's the unit of measurement?
That will be for incidents only, so not for, that's not offence data. It's just at so reported incidents as opposed to conviction rates, which is a different set of indicators and data.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as adults in treatment, with respect to adults in treatment, if we have a look at that data and the table that's been provided that outlines the information from 2013 through to 2021-22, we can see that opiates are the sort of main issue within the opiates, and also alcohol only use in terms of adults in treatment are the main areas of concern, or the areas with the highest levels of adults in treatment within those categories. And then there's some main points which we've pulled out and highlighted in terms of the information contained within the Berkshire West Drug and Alcohol Needs Assessment, which was undertaken in October 22. And from that executive summary document, there are some highlights and some key information that we believe would be useful for committee to have sight of. That link for the whole document, full document, is contained within the report. And moving on then to what actions are being considered to break the cycle of demand. There's in terms of actual treatment, there's a whole host of different treatment elements in terms of trying to break the cycle of demand in terms of substance misuse management, in terms of different strategies and different treatment options. but also to highlight there is the implementation of Buvidal, which is a medicine used to treat dependence on opioids, and users are more likely to stay on that medication and less likely to relapse into drug use with the use of this drug. So we've been implementing that locally, and it is going well, which is good, as it increases the chances of individuals staying on that particular road to recovery. So, and treatment. So in terms of question 3, could further comment be provided regarding the relatively high levels of drug driving? The information that we've obtained from, and this is from police data, is in respect to drug and drink driving offences, because they're both noted under driving offence categories. And we can see there in terms of the months of the data and the different breakdown of the number of offences. Sadly, we haven't been able to disaggregate drink driving from drug driving offences, and we have asked the police to do some more, police data analysts to do some work to be able to disaggregate that information so we can provide it in more detail. But the other thing of interest is the fact that police do carry out roadside drug swipes on motorists for those individuals that are suspected of being impaired by drugs. And there is drug testing options, roadside drug testing options for suspected cannabis and cocaine use, with additional drug testing ability to be undertaken at custody. So just for those 2 types of suspected drugs, cocaine and cannabis, that can be done roadside, but any additional drug testing, of which there is a total of 17 drugs that can be tested for, that is in custody. What is being done to combat the use of nitrous oxide? So nitrous oxide are those small canisters, or laughing gas, and it has a number of different uses, legitimate uses, both medical and commercial. It's the gas that goes in sort of the whipped cream canisters and to blow up balloons, etc. But it was also found in sort of parks in terms of illegal sort of use in terms of consumption of nitrous oxide. So at the minute, whilst it's illegal to sell nitrous oxide to anybody under the age of 18, it is not illegal to possess, which is the small sort of technicality in the law which is causing the actual government at the moment to propose a ban on the sale and possession, which is being proposed as part of the antisocial behaviour proposals that the government is looking to implement approximately at Christmas, in time period of sort of Christmas this year. The proposal is to ban that and to place legislation in place by the end of the year. In addition, education packages being developed for teachers and students and guardians and offered out to all Wokingham schools in terms of just increasing the awareness of nitrous oxide consumption and some additional advice about how to tackle that as a parent or guardian. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Pauline, please.
Very quick one. Because we've got a large police station that covers half of Reading, is there not any other way we can get this data, like, you know, the postcode of the person who's actually committed the offence rather than the place that the police happen to find it? Because otherwise, even your total occurrences by month data presumably includes half of Reading who end up in Loddon Valley, which means the whole thing's completely meaningless.
It can do. Unfortunately, we're not able to get the data by breakdown of postcode for the people that are, because it is a personal offence, so there are individuals involved. We have asked for the information to be broken down in a different way, so where information is collected in terms of perhaps asking whether they're a borough resident. You know, we're clearly interested in the number of individuals as opposed to sort of anything else. So also, I think in the past we've asked for the data in relation to the police station to be stripped out as well. So we've asked for that to just be ignored or disaggregated in terms of the postcode of the police station. So we've asked the analysts to do that. They're just having, I think, a bit of a time with resourcing capacity to be able to, because I think it's it has to go into sort of I'm told a complex system of trying to measure that data, but as soon as it's available, we will make it available to committee.
Peter.
Hi, Narinda. Somewhat odd question. With regard to the adults in treatment, do we see any potential issues forthcoming with the closure of pharmacies and thus the supply of treatment?
That's a very good question. I think the answer is not that we've seen at the moment, simply because some of the treatment options that were being taken place in the pharmacies that were happy to do it, those are still in situ. So they're normally some of the bigger pharmacies, but also some of those treatment options are now being moved into other more suitable spaces as well, where there's a hybrid or a larger health centre or spaces where people are more available. We've also got some interesting options in terms of where the actual substance misuse services are based. So that is a wider option as well. So we haven't nothing that we've seen that leads us to be alarmed at this stage.
Well, thank you.
Miles.
Thank you. Hi, Narinda. Question for me was, sorry, I need to put my glasses on for this. We've got 6,000 people in Berkshire West who've got a problem drug and alcohol use. The figures above for treatment are only based on Wokingham, but they're about, give or take, 350, 400 people, which seems to me like quite a small percentage. Now, I accept it's only Wokingham. It could be 3 times that amount if it includes West Berkshire and Reading, but that's still not a big percentage. You know, what can be done to actually advertise these services much better to make people aware that they are actually available? And the second part of that was, we've got adults in treatment here, but do we have any feeling for what percentage of this treatment is successful?
Very good question. So in terms of, I'll take the last question first. In terms of successful treatment, there is, we do measure adults that relapse or have successfully stayed in treatment for 6 months and 12 months. So we do have measures in place that allow us to see how much longevity the treatment is, not that they've just completed, I don't know, 3 stages, 4 stages, 5 stages, and they're sort of churned out at the end. It doesn't we don't measure just like that. There is some longevity about after the treatment finishes or contact with the treatment service. So that is recorded and is also submitted in terms of our National Treatment Service data that has to be submitted nationally. And then what was your first question, Charles?
First question was about advertising, basically how this could be promoted to a wider audience. But coming back to what you just said, would you be able to make that data available to the committee for Wokingham?
Yes, yeah, we can provide that.
So it was about, we've got probably, I'm guessing, if the figures in West Berkshire and Reading are similar to Wokingham, we've got probably 15% of the actual target base, roughly, who we're actually talking to, and what can be done to actually make sure these services are more widely promoted and there's more uptake, because of the 6,000 people who need it, there's a big audience that's being missed here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got plans in place in terms of raising the awareness and education around accessing treatment services. Sadly, there is still quite a large stigma in terms of accessing any type of help around substance misuse, and to sort of rewind on that ever so slightly, in terms of some of the Wokingham challenges, the biggest challenge that we have in terms of the Wokingham borough space is probably that we have quite a large percentage of what is coined as people that are functioning in day-to-day living, absolutely holding down a successful career, will often be homeowners, will have children, and are very well respected within their peers and colleagues, but may have a problem with substances. In the main, we find that they have an issue with alcohol consumption and the levels of unhealthy levels of alcohol consumption, and trying to reach out to that particular group of individuals is a real challenge, to be fair. So we are trying different ways in terms of how we might engage that particular group in more successful treatment numbers coming through and access to treatment. There's also been quite a change and quite a flip in terms of recent years with the help of COVID, in terms of being able to provide more treatment options online, which was not as well developed pre or during COVID, but has become more of an option, and perhaps allows more accessible treatment options, and particularly for individuals who may not want to go and physically join a group. And we've also had quite a lot of success in terms of providing information online, so sort of more self-diagnosis and self-help in terms of websites and signposting into specialist spaces and places for particular individuals. So it may well be that it's people are more able to assist themselves and dial down some of their consumption around alcohol and or other substances in a more informal setting, self-regulated setting, instead of necessarily reaching out for treatment. But we do know we've still got quite a lot of work to do in terms of engagement with individuals, because we will have a plan in place for monitoring hits on websites and so on and so forth, so we can see whether those education campaigns are successful and people are doing the sort of self-regulating arm of treatment, as opposed to formally approaching for treatment. And we will keep a really close eye on that. But anything that can raise awareness and information, we will be undertaking in terms of physically being in spaces, but also in the online social media platforms. We're also undertaking education and increased education support in schools. So we're starting that from a very early age in terms of awareness and health promotion, and also working really closely with our PSHE colleagues and colleagues in public health in terms of promoting that health and wellbeing message as well.
David. Just thank you. Narendra, thanks. There's an awful lot of information in here. I find it quite challenging trying to pull it apart and to know which bit we should be focusing on. And the commentary just given in response to Charles's question was actually highly informative, because it lends itself more to talk about the health issues around alcohol abuse rather than latent criminality. And I think when we go back to the raw data in this, it might be useful, or it may not, I don't know, I'm interested in others' opinion, to try and pull some of this apart to see which is the particular issue we're focusing on. To see a raw table there of drug offences tells us sort of something, but there's a difference in my mind when we talk about a drug offence between some kids caught smoking a joint in the park and somebody cruising around in a car handing out drugs in car parks for say kids. And it's trying to get a handle on what are those, what's the scale of the problem in those different sort of aspects, and how do we actually formulate a plan to tackle the ones that we choose to prioritise.
Yeah, that's a fair comment and fair challenge, David. Thank you. So what I would say in respect of that is that we are in the process of signing off an action plan, a detailed action plan, which has been based on the very detailed needs assessment that's been undertaken. That action plan points us towards exactly what you've described there in terms of the different amounts of work and different types of work that need to be undertaken in those different spaces. Is it in the criminal substance misuse space, or is it in the education and prevention space? And that the action plan gives a very good oversight of that. And we are just, like I said, just in the process of finalising that, and then developing a delivery group responsible for the delivery of that group. So I would probably recommend, if committee would like to do so, have sight of that perhaps when that group is somewhat into delivery and have made some inroads on implementation around that plan, to give a more detailed idea about which spaces are more pertinent to the borough in terms of work needed to be implemented and being implemented, so we can give an update as to what the work is and how it's going.
Norman. Thank you. Just come back to the drug driving. You said, you know, that the report drink and drug offences together. My recollection was we were presented with some figures for the Christmas period where it did seem to be broken down, and it was that provoked the question as to, we were quite surprised if on the face of it the information was telling us that the number of drug offences was quite high in those particular figures. Just wonder if you can comment further on that.
Yes, I think so. I recall the figures that were in the original report, and they were lifted for a particular time just over the Christmas period for a campaign that was being undertaken, and a particular operation in terms of police activity that had been undertaken around the Christmas period for prevention and detection of drink and drive offences. Specifically, I think it was actually a drink driving operation, which then highlighted that, you know, there are a number of drug and drink driving related issues. So that particular information had been broken down in relation to the activity and the operation that the police colleagues had undertaken in respect of that Christmas related campaign. So in order to give a more wider context of what the actual problem looks like, because there are some periods during the year, sadly, where particular concerns and incidents are more prevalent than other ones, and Christmas, sadly, Christmas and New Year is one of those where we do see a spike in drink and drug driving offences from what the data tells us. But in able to give a better to give better context around what that looks like across the year, it's more detailed work for us to undertake that. So that's what we've requested from police colleagues.
Okay, thanks. I just wonder, then, was that just a random check, or was that intelligence led in some way around Christmas? It was just the proportion of it surprised us. I think there were a few of us commented on it. It was just a surprise to us that the drug aspect was so high in relation to the total.
So I'd have to go back and check, I'm afraid. I think in relation to that particular operation, they random. I think in terms of doing an operation, there were particular hotspots or particular areas that had been highlighted for activity in relation to, you know, either antisocial driving or particular speeding offences. So it was part of an organised campaign across the Thames Valley area with numbers of days allocated across different boroughs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. If everybody's finished. Oh, sorry, Al, missed you in the corner.
Well, I just got one question, really, because I mean, I sort of remember from 40 years ago, there was a moral panic about youths and glue sniffing, but is that still a thing? You know, it's nothing we ever hear about these days. So is that something that's completely gone away?
Not 100%. It hasn't disappeared. So we do get the occasional incident of glue-related sniffing, but reported to us. But it's very, very far and few between. Very far and few between. I think the nature of concerns has definitely changed to newer or other substances that individuals are, or especially young people. I think there was more of a sort of a particular age group that was connected with that sniffing type activity. I think I recall from many years ago. And sadly, it's just about I think now about the availability of substances, and the online space has definitely not helped with the easy access to some of those substances being available. You know, dare to say, you know, sort of in an online availability space. So certainly not in the borough is glue sniffing of concern.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I've got a one question I'd like to ask. If you look on page 24, statement there, you know, of 375 children in Berkshire West who are living with adults who are in drug, alcohol or treatment. What activities exist to prevent further harm to those children if the parents don't actually follow the treatments? It's not the case of are we intervening and taking the children away, but is there any ongoing help that's given to those children?
There's family therapy as part of substance misusing parents. So children and family members of substance misusing a family member, and those family members that may have been affected by individuals' substance misuse, is there are groups running and available for treatment and help for those individuals as well. So that's something that is offered, as well as to ensure that the well-being and the sort of well-being and the health supports of those individuals are also catered for.
Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you, Narendra.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Peter.
It's not a question, it's following up on David's point about asking Narendra to come back to present the figures of the crimes. I don't know whether
could you ask?
Yes, it's just Narendra, your kind offer to come back to report on the actual details of the crimes, or the crime figures. So it's just to record that on a later agenda or something.
Yeah, was it Narendra? Was it specifically? I've noted down oversight of the delivery group. I think it was all tied in with that. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So what I was recommending, if that's okay, is perhaps if I come back in a committee in this municipal year, but perhaps towards the end of it, and then we have some real information around what is being delivered by that oversight group.
Thank you. I agree with what Peter said. I was going to ask Narendra, is it possible to have Wokingham figures rather than West Berkshire figures in it as well?
I will. I will try. I will try my best. We have got some disaggregated figures, but so therefore I will ensure that they are disaggregated to a Wokingham level as best as possible.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
So the next item on the agenda is to form up the members for the Active Traveller Task and Finish Group. The breakdown should be 221 to meet the make up with the council. Already have Peter and Alistair as volunteers. Pauline. Oops.
I was just going to ask, are these daytime meetings? Okay, well, the reason I ask is I work full time, so that would make it impossible for me. But if it's evenings mainly, I'm happy for my name to go forward.
So there's a make-up. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Sorry, just a question on that one. Do we have any anticipated date for the next meeting?
Not at the moment, no. It's all reliant on as and when the schemes come through. So I'm in contact with Rob Curtis, who's sort of leading on that. But as soon as I hear anything, I'll give as much warning as possible.
The only reason I ask is because of the award that we've got from the government for land. So just would be nice to have a bit more detail on what that money is going to be used for, etc., etc.
For the LC whip sort of as a whole.
Yeah,
Yeah.
600k we've got. So.
Yeah, so we'll have 2 meetings a year to look at the LC whip, and then as and when needed to look at the individual scheme. So I would imagine we'd be looking at the LC whip probably in the next 3 months, something like that, I'd have thought.
So I think the amount of LC whip money will probably pay for one good cycleway. It's not a lot of money. It'd be interesting to know whether the government prioritised any of the schemes that were put into the LC whip, and a bit more about, you know, what the response was to the LC whip in terms of what things they thought they'd like us to spend the money on, because they will probably prioritise stuff. And also an update on what's happening with the Woodley Cycleway would be good as well, please.
Sorry, so I guess those can be done before the meeting, so they can be sent via email to us.
Yeah, I'll have a conversation with Rob, and I'll put together those points, and then we can also discuss them at the meeting as well. Members, if I take you through the work programme. So we've got the first meeting, the next meeting is 3rd of July 2023. The only note of absence on there is the item on the WBC earmarked reserves, which I know members were very keen it would come to July. I have spoken with the Section 151 officer, and he's still fairly adamant that it should come to September. So my suggestion is that, Chris, as chair, I organise a meeting between yourself and Graham, and understand fully what which meeting it needs to go to, and then we'll put it at that appropriate meeting. In terms of other items for that 3rd of July meeting, so ordinarily we would have had the Directorate Priorities come to this meeting, but because of the new Director of Place and Growth who's just started, Graham also wanted to align with him and give him a bit of time to settle in and understand. So we pushed that back to July. So Graham and Georgia will be presenting the sort of priorities alongside executive members for this municipal year. And we also have the Community Safety Partnership, Violence Against Women and Girls Strategy Update, and Anti-Abuse Charter. Those will be led by Narinda, who's just presented this evening. And then sort of looking further ahead, if we could look at that list on page 34, and try and maybe allocate for the September meeting, and possibly just one item for that 1st October meeting, because that's the first one of the medium-term financial plan. So those will all be very heavy. So if members have got any burning desires for what should go to that September meeting and the October one.
Well, I think we've been talking about the council's arts and culture strategy for a long time, all through last year, and it's never come. So is this the time that we can have that?
the answer to that one?
I'm very happy for it to come. It's been on the agenda several times, and due to illness and our agenda being very busy, it's been flip-flopping away. So it's by no fault of this committee or the officers. So it can definitely come to one of those meetings. Yes.
I'd be interested to see number 12, which is very significant for all the residents in the borough. I'm not sure if it's that sort of content is coming to any of the other meetings, but I'd be very interested in seeing that.
So that one specifically, we always have this issue is incredibly large. I mean, that item could be its own committee, frankly. So I don't know if there's any direction from members about specifically what you would like to look at, maybe one or two significant policies or items.
I think the one that I'm particularly interested in is car parking and bus strategy, an update on those. But I'm also quite interested in highways and transport maintenance as well. Not quite so interested in cycling, because I think we're going to cover that in the task and finish group.
I can definitely, Pauline, have a discussion with officers about getting an update on the bus strategy, the implementation of it. And what was the other one that you said you were interested in?
Car parking.
Car parking. So yeah, I can.
Highways maintenance.
Car parking, highways maintenance. Strategy. Yeah, so if you leave that with me, Pauline, I'll have a discussion with highways officers and see what's available, and then I'll speak with the chair and arrange some items for that September meeting.
David? Thank you. Yeah, I do agree with Pauline that though it's a large topic, we shouldn't duck it. I mean, it's probably more relevant to be discussing that than the burial capacity across the borough. The other one that I'd like to see on the list there is where we are with the local plan update, item 3. But we'll have to find time for that at some point.
Yeah, I think the chair suggested perhaps that would be a good one to tie onto that 2nd of October meeting, to give them a bit of additional time. So I'll speak with Ian Bellinger, who leads on that, and confirm that that's an appropriate time. Yeah.
I agree with David. He said what I was going to say.
Just more on the highways one with regards to devil in the detail about defects reported, defects addressed, and defects re-reported after being addressed. So failure rate would be interesting.
So we do have the one where it was all resurfaced and then it was a wrong bitumen and that already done again. So whose cost was that?
And just on the MTFP quickly, as in previous years, we'll probably be organising a training session, which will especially be useful for new members to the committee. So details will be forthcoming with that one.
I remember towards the end of term, we also talked about a review of the planning process. I can't remember if that was this committee or the management committee, but that isn't on that list on page 34.
Yeah, that's just slipped off the list. So I will put that on the list for next time and look to allocate that to one of the later meetings, perhaps.
Could I just ask, so 17 scrutinising the borough-wide parking management strategy different from 12 viewing car parking?
I would have to ask highways officers on that. My guess is it's probably all interlinked, but let me come back with a definitive answer either way.
Sorry, Chair, one quick thing. Regarding highways, could we have a look? One thing that I get continually pestered about by residents is customer service of highways, you know, and response times and KPIs, that kind of thing. Basically, it'd be really good to have some understanding of whether that's a myth, basically, and they're actually doing a lot, or whether they're not.
It would be good idea to get an idea of the volume of requests, what makes it into the cut and what doesn't, etc. Yeah, quite agree with you.
Really.
Sorry, it's one of the other things, I don't know whether we can do this as a committee, is actually management agents for flats, for estates, is actually how to deal with them. Norman brings up points where he's involved in some, or I'm involved in a bunch, and they just create pain points. We've had the lady talk about the flooding aspect, trying to deal with them. So I don't know whether we can pull some of them in to hear what they do as external people.
Actually, it's a topic on my agenda as well, being that I found in my sales pack that actually the developers had paid Woking Borough Council 2008 the money for green space maintenance, and it had never been handed over to the council, so we're paying for it in management fees as well. So there are some issues in the background that need to be addressed, and I think we should actually look at how the management companies are dealing with it and what is being put in place to bring the council into the ability to look after these things. What fees should we push? Should we ask them? It's a planning item, so yes, I think we should.
I'm not even sure if this is on the scope of this meeting, but the other thing that interests me a bit, and I've had a few complaints about, is the actual complaints process and the performance of the complaints process and the amount of time that people take to go through the complaints process and their satisfaction with the results. Now, obviously, they're not likely to be satisfied with the results a large proportion of the time if they don't get them accepted. But I'm just wondering if there's something about the complaints process we could get something on at some point, because I don't think I've ever seen that scrutinised.
So we've at the management committee we've had reports on our approach to customer service and customer contact. So I think we can pick it up through that avenue rather than this committee.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. I wasn't sure if it's in the remit of this. It's a bit wider than customer service. But yeah, I think that's fine. Thank you.
Just looking through that list, whether it might be helpful. I don't know how you do it, whether we can actually cluster some of these topics into kind of work streams or subject streams. I mean, there's on the next meeting, we've got 3 there that deal with, I mean, broadly speaking, abuse and safety. I'm sure they're all very distinct in their own particular areas, but that is a big agenda for that meeting. And I think there's other topics we've touched on here, so that actually maybe if we had a meeting which was themed, for want of a better word, around one topic, it feels a bit more holistic than jumping from one to the other and then to remember what was said at a previous meeting some months back.
What I'll do, David, yeah, generally we do try to sort of theme, for want of a better word, meetings. What I'll do for the next meeting is I'll try and reformat this work programme and sort of try and cluster it a bit better, so it might be easier when you are selecting items. You can sort of select 2 at a time from the same thing rather than having to go up and down the list all the time. Point taken, thank you.
In that case, the meeting comes to an end. Thank you very much for your time.